Multiple sclerosis, or MS for short, is a chronic demyelinating disease of the nervous system. In this mnemonic video, we'll dive into all the important facts about multiple sclerosis so you'll be prepared for test day. We're at the theater to watch the release of the new action hero movie, and you can tell that this is an action hero by all the scars covering her body. You could even say that she has multiple scars all over her body, if you catch my drift. The multiple scars here should serve as your memory anchor for multiple sclerosis, since multiple sclerosis sounds like multiple scars, right? What's more, sclerosis is just a fancy term for scarring, so multiple sclerosis literally translates to multiple scars. As you'll see later, this disease basically causes scars or plaques to develop all over the central nervous system. But before that, let's talk about the cause of this disease. In typical action hero fashion, our actress seems to be firing some sort of weapon, but notice how the recoil here has caused the weapon to hit her eye, creating a self-inflicted injury. This self-inflicted injury should help you remember that MS is an autoimmune disorder. You know, since autoimmune diseases are caused by the body's immune system attacking itself, kind of like a self-inflicted injury. In multiple sclerosis, the immune system mistakenly recognizes the myelin sheath of nerves in the brain and spinal cord as foreign substances and initiates an attack of those tissues. While the precise cause is still unknown, this can result due to a genetic predisposition or exposure to an environmental trigger. We must have just missed a big car chase scene because this car seems to have been in some sort of wreck or explosion. There's even a bit of smoldering debris that is burning off the white sheaths around those wires. Lucky for you, these degrading white wire sheaths will help you to remember that demyelination occurs in MS. Recall that myelin is a protective fatty sheath that surrounds the axon of neurons, protecting them and allowing electrical impulses to move faster along the nerve. As we just mentioned, MS is caused by autoimmune attack of these myelin sheaths, which results in inflammation and damage. Since nerves are like wires, the damage to these wire sheaths is a lot like the destruction of myelin around the nerves. Now, let's take a look back at our actress. As you might expect from an action movie, they cast a young woman for the leading role. This young woman should help you remember that MS classically affects young women. Multiple sclerosis is more common in women than men, with a sex ratio close to 3:1. As an autoimmune disorder, the onset of symptoms usually occurs in young women in their late teens and early 20s, extending into the late 30s. Next, let's pan over to that broken optic lens. Looks like the recoil of her weapon ended up damaging her optic lenses. The broken optics here should help you remember the finding of optic neuritis in multiple sclerosis. You know, since optic lenses are a recurring symbol for the optic nerve, and optic neuritis simply refers to inflammation or damage in this nerve. Optic neuritis happens because of inflammatory demyelination of the optic nerve and is one of the classic symptoms of multiple sclerosis. This typically manifests as blurry vision or a dark spot in the visual fields. Patients may sometimes complain of pain affecting the eye, although this is relatively rare. Usually, optic neuritis affects only one eye, but it may sometimes affect both eyes. Now, take a look at what really caused that injury. It was the kickback from the gun hitting her eye. But this is not just any gun, it's a fancy marksman gun. This marksman gun hitting one eye should help you remember the finding of a Marcus gun pupil, also known as a relative afferent pupillary defect. You know, a marksman gun for Marcus gun, and it is hitting one eye, causing a relative defect compared to her other eye, right? A Marcus gun pupil, or relative afferent pupillary defect, is a clinically detected sign of optic neuritis in MS patients. As you can guess, this refers to a defect in pupil constriction that affects one eye more than the other. Recall that the optic nerve is responsible for carrying light signals to the brain, which responds by constricting the pupil to let in more or less light depending on the environment. Since optic neuritis tends to affect one eye only, light shined in the affected eye will cause no pupillary change, since the light signals can't reach the brain through the damaged nerve. However, when light is shined into the other, normal eye, both pupils will constrict normally. This relative difference in pupillary constriction is called a Marcus gun pupil. Got that? Let's shift our gaze back to this car wreck. I particularly noticed that the headlights have been misaligned and seem to be jerked towards different directions. These misaligned headlights will help you to remember that nystagmus is another possible symptom of MS. Nystagmus describes involuntary rhythmic eye movements caused by misalignment between our eyes and gaze control centers in our brain. Nystagmus can occur in MS due to demyelination and damage to the oculomotor or vestibular nerve systems. This is more frequent in both eyes and usually manifests with double vision. Now, let's take a moment to look away from the screen and look specifically at the phone in your hand. Since we're in a theater, it's only good etiquette to mute your phone so it doesn't ring in the middle of the movie. That's why you've silenced your phone, as evidenced by that silver bell with an X over it. By the way, this silver bell that is muted should help you remember cerebellar dysfunction. Since a silver bell is our recurring symbol for cerebellar, a muted bell should remind you of dysfunction of the cerebellum. Cerebellar dysfunction is a potential side effect of multiple sclerosis. Since the cerebellum is responsible for motor coordination and balance, damage to the cerebellar motor pathways in multiple sclerosis can lead to impaired coordination. Signs include ataxia, dysarthria, and intention tremors. Just know that these patients tend to have problems with muscle coordination and balance. Now that we made sure our phone won't interrupt the movie, we can shift our gaze back to the car. Our actress seems to be falling onto the car's motor and is breaking it. This broken motor should help you remember that motor deficits are another clinical manifestation of multiple sclerosis. Motor deficits occur due to damage of motor nerves by way of demyelination. These motor deficits may affect the upper motor neurons or lower motor neurons, which can lead to a variety of muscle control problems that always result in weakness. If we take a closer look at the young woman falling, we can also see that the motion sensor that was on the car's hood was also broken in her fall. This broken sensor should help you remember the finding of sensory deficits in MS patients. Get it? Sensor for sensory, and this is a broken sensor indicating that sensation is broken or impaired. When demyelination affects sensory nerves, a sensory deficit can occur, which manifests as loss of vibration, touch, pain, or temperature perception. Patients may also perceive numbness and tingling in their extremities. Notice that when our actress fell backwards, the breaking of the motor actually released electric sparks hitting her spine. This electric shock along the spine should help you remember the finding of the Lhermitte sign, or an electric shock-like sensation along the spine. This is another symptom seen in multiple sclerosis. Basically, movements of the neck can lead to a shock-like sensation that travels down the spine, sometimes reaching the extremities of the body. Perhaps because of the sudden recoil of the gun or the electric shock, it appears that our heroine has accidentally relieved herself on the set. This picture should help you remember urinary incontinence or a lack of bladder control. Neurogenic bladder incontinence is another finding in multiple sclerosis, when the nerve impulses controlling the bladder are delayed or interrupted due to demyelinated nerves. The end result is a loss of bladder control. Afterwards, let's check out the burning wreckage that is actually causing the wire sheath damage. Yep, you can bet that it is getting hot in here. This burning wreckage damaging the wire sheath should help you remember that the symptoms of multiple sclerosis tend to be exacerbated by heat and hot temperatures. This finding is sometimes referred to as the Uthoff phenomenon. Basically, the symptoms we described above tend to be worsened by anything that increases body temperature, including hot weather, exercise, fevers, or even a hot bath. Okay, that's it for the clinical presentation of MS. Let's shift gears to discuss some laboratory findings you may see on test day. Now, shift your gaze back to my phone where you can see what else is playing in the theater. Yep, there seems to be a movie about a certain genie running. By the way that this genie's hands are splayed out into the letter Y kind of reminds me of the shape of an antibody, since antibodies are Y-shaped molecules, right? What's more, this genie should help remind you of the letter G. Putting together, this antibody-shaped genie should remind you of IgG. You see, one laboratory finding suggestive of multiple sclerosis is increased IgG in the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. This IgG is thought to be released by B cells and plays a central role in attacking the myelin sheaths in the brain and spinal cord. Next, let's pan over to the old band on my phone. Looks like this theater is going for some reruns of some classical old bands. This old band should help you remember the finding of oligoclonal bands. An oligoclonal band is just a fancy way of describing the finding of a lot of one type of protein on protein electrophoresis of the cerebrospinal fluid. What protein is this, you ask? Well, it's usually the IgG we just talked about. Basically, the finding of oligoclonal bands is another way test writers can tell you that there is a ton of a specific protein, usually IgG, in a person's CSF. Next, check out that book on Millionaire Basics in my bag, since everyone has bought one of these get-rich-quick self-help books at some point in their lives, right? The Millionaire Basics here represents myelin basic protein. Millionaire Basics for myelin basic. Make sense? Myelin basic protein, or MBP, is a protein found in, you guessed it, myelin. This protein is usually not found inside the CSF, so an increased amount of MBP indicates that the myelin has been damaged, causing the release of MBP. This obviously occurs in multiple sclerosis because the immune system literally attacks and breaks down myelin sheaths. It's not rocket science, folks. Going back to our white wire sheaths that have been damaged, I also want to note that these sheaths are colored in white for a good reason. You see, the areas of our brain and spinal cord that are high in myelin are also referred to as white matter, named since the fatty content of myelin tends to make these regions appear white on gross pathology. Contrast this against areas of gray matter which tend to contain cell bodies of neurons. As you might expect from a demyelinating disease, the damage in multiple sclerosis tends to be localized to the white matter of the brain and spinal cord. This manifests on test day and real life through radiology reports, where radiologists will say that an MRI has revealed multiple white matter lesions in a person's brain and spinal cord. Now, I also want to point out another key finding here. These multiple lesions tend to be separated in space and time. Space meaning that the damage tends to affect a range of different locations in the body, and time meaning that symptomatic episodes can be separated by months to even years. The finding of multiple neurological deficits affecting different locations in the body over different episodes across time should light up warning bells for multiple sclerosis. Afterwards, notice that the broken wires here actually run around one of the car's vents. In other words, these are periventricular wires, since peri is just the Latin stem for around something. This should help you remember the finding of periventricular plaques on imaging. As we previously discussed, plaques are just a term for the white matter scarring and damage in multiple sclerosis. Notably, the lesions tend to have a preference for the white matter surrounding the ventricles of the brain, leading to the term periventricular plaques. So if you ever find yourself looking at an MRI, look around the ventricles to see if you can see hyperintensities indicating damage to the white matter. Okay, with the laboratory and imaging findings out of the way, we can close out with a discussion of treatment. Take a look at the back wall of the theater where we can see a new promotion for a space movie about asteroids. This asteroid is our recurring symbol for steroids, since asteroids sounds like steroids, right? As you might expect from an autoimmune condition, one of the best ways to treat an acute flare of multiple sclerosis is to administer steroids. IV steroids are usually the preferred treatment since drugs like dexamethasone can work to suppress inflammation and prevent further damage to the nervous system. As you might have expected, the asteroid here is part of a documentary series about nature. Coincidentally, this nature also helps me remember natalizumab, another treatment for multiple sclerosis. Nature for natalizumab. Easy. Natalizumab is an antibody against a type of integrin involved in neuronal inflammation. Treatment with natalizumab has been shown to improve outcomes and reduce flares in patients with multiple sclerosis. Afterwards, let's pan over to the... Wait, is that interference hitting the display? I guess they are beta testing this new holographic stuff after all. This beta testing causing this interference should help you remember treatment with beta interferon. Interestingly, beta interferon, or interferon beta, is a cytokine that can be used to treat multiple sclerosis. While the exact mechanism of action here is still under research, it has been shown that treatment with beta interferon suppresses the B and T cell activity, causing damage in MS. If you take a look at the actual film that's getting interference, you'll notice that it is about a gladiator. Since everyone's seen a movie about a certain gladiator before, this gladiator should help you remember glatiramer, another treatment for multiple sclerosis. Gladiator for glatiramer, right? Glatiramer is a synthetic oligopeptide that comes from myelin basic protein that can also improve outcomes when used as a treatment for patients with multiple sclerosis. Alright, that's all for this video on multiple sclerosis. Let's recap. Multiple sclerosis, or MS for short, is a chronic demyelinating disease of the nervous system. It is an autoimmune disease that occurs when the immune system mistakenly attacks the myelin sheaths surrounding the axons of neurons, causing demyelination. As an autoimmune disorder, multiple sclerosis is more common in women, classically affecting young women between the ages of 20 and 40. Clinical manifestations include a range of neurological deficits that are usually distributed over space and time, meaning that each episode can affect a very different location on the body and is often separated by long periods of time. Specific findings include optic neuritis, or inflammatory demyelination of the optic nerve. This optic neuritis can manifest as a relative afferent pupillary defect, also known as a Marcus Gunn pupil. Damage to the vestibular or oculomotor tracts can lead to nystagmus. Damage to cerebellar tracts can lead to ataxia and other impairments in coordination. Motor and sensory deficits can also be seen. Urinary incontinence can also occur due to damage in nerves controlling the bladder. Two relatively interesting findings are the Lhermitte sign, an electric shock-like sensation that runs down the spine in response to neck flexion, and the Uthoff phenomenon, the finding that symptoms get worse in response to increased temperatures. A lumbar puncture in these patients reveals increased IgG in the CSF, which can also manifest as oligoclonal bands on protein electrophoresis. Increased myelin basic protein is also seen, an indication of a demyelinating disorder affecting the central nervous system. MRI imaging will reveal multiple white matter lesions called plaques, which tend to affect the periventricular areas. Treatment of multiple sclerosis involves IV steroids for acute flares. A combination of beta-interferon, glatiramer, and natalizumab are used for maintenance therapy to reduce neuronal inflammation and prevent flares from occurring. And now, we're all done with multiple sclerosis. See you next time!